Salute e salve e benvenuti ad un nuovo episodio di Storia d'Italia Extra. Episodio 52, The Byzantine Papacy, con Bry Jensen. Ora, questo è un episodio in un certo senso aggiuntivo. Vi spiego. Nello scorso episodio, che era sempre con Bry, è venuto fuori che in sostanza noi avevamo già realizzato una puntata a proposito del papato bizantino e quindi il nuovo episodio copriva il papato cosiddetto carolingio. Ora, la cosa che non avevo notato è che in realtà quella con Bry fu la prima diretta in inglese che, pur restando su YouTube, io non ho mai pubblicato qui su Storia d'Italia Extra, perché in realtà l'ho registrata ben prima di aprire Storia d'Italia Extra. Mi è stato fatto notare che appunto mancava l'episodio e allora ho pensato, ottima occasione per aggiungerlo, così che abbiate sia la puntata sul papato bizantino che quella sul papato carolingio. Chiaro? E quindi faccio un'eccezione alla regola e invece di pubblicare una nuova puntata dopo un mese ve la pubblico già dopo 2 settimane, in modo da integrare quanto abbiamo visto con Bry e tornare indietro e con lo sguardo retrovisore al papato che va dalla guerra greco-gotica all'ascesa dei Carolingi. Buon ascolto!
Live.
And we are live. Salute e salve e benvenuti alla Storia d'Italia and welcome to the history of Italy. So, first time in English. Let's see.
Yes.
Salute e salve. So, there's one person today will be speaking in English. The other will try.
It's better than me speaking in Italian the whole time because il mio italiano è troppo lento.
So guys, you see, be careful with Bry because she does understand Italian. Huh? So just behave.
Working with it.
So thank you very much, Bry, for being here. I mean, it's fantastic. I've met the podcast Pontifacts a bit more than a year ago, and we have become friends since. It's really one of the podcasts that I wait every week, and now every 2 weeks, to listen to the new episode, as Sam does with mine. So I'm really excited to talk about a topic that is not so well known. I mean, in general, I will say these high Middle Ages are, pretty unknown in general, but the Byzantine papacy is a very peculiar topic. So I'm very excited to talk about it with you, Bry. But before I start talking, do you want to present yourself to the audience?
Sure. Ciao a tutti. I'm Bry, and I host Pontifacts, which is a papal history podcast ranking all of the popes from Peter to Francis. And in each episode, we look at a single pope and we talk about their biography and we contextualize their papacy within relevant history around them. And then we rate them based on categories that we've come up with, like how successful they are at being pope and how scandalous they are. And
more scandal, more points, of course. So
absolutely, yes.
It's not less scandal, better. It's more the more the better.
Which might come to hurt us as we get into the modern era, but we're working on that. And then we judge them on their secular impact, how long they were pope for, and what their face looks like, because
yeah, also, why not? We have to see if they're beautiful men or not. Usually,
well, there have been some hotties.
Who's the hottest? I remember there was one specifically. I don't remember the name. Who was the hot guy?
Pope Caius is the one who has scored the highest for actually being good looking.
Pope?
Caius.
Caius.
Caius with a C.
Caius. Caio. Okay. So, okay. Go look at him, and see. He's probably interesting. So this is, and where are you now with the podcast? Because this is interesting, related to this, to this evening.
This is perfect timing because next Monday we will be releasing Pope Zachary, who is the last pope of the Byzantine papacy. So we're just coming to the very end of the period that we're going to talk about. And we will be entering in the next couple weeks the Frankish papacy period, where the Pope's relationship with the Carolingian kings of the Franks become much more important to them.
Yeah. And the relationship with Byzantium, with Constantinople, and the medieval Roman Empire. So, and this is really interesting. So we are talking about a period that goes more or less from the beginning of the 6th century to the mid of the 8th century. So we're talking about a bit more than 2 centuries of history. So it's again, it's a really fairly unknown period of history. So I have a question before we start talking about the topics. I before I make you a question, guys, you can make questions and we will be answering after I make a few questions. So if during our chat you have a curiosity, please write to us and we will answer it. Okay, so feel free to do that. So my first question is this one. So you come to papal history as a non-Catholic, okay? And I think Fry is kind of your co-host. She's kind of ex-Catholic, timid Catholic.
Lapsed Catholic.
Lapsed Catholic, yes. So I get the feeling that in Italy, will come to you as a shock, but Italy is a Catholic country. So I know it's So it's not, from my experience, not a lot of people are interested in church history. I gave the impression that people do not, maybe they don't value, the importance that it has on history. From a lay point of view, you don't have to be religious to appreciate the importance of it. So I guess, what would you say to people listening to us today? Why should they care about the life of the popes? Let's say that maybe a lot of them, they don't like them.
Well, and I think what you've touched on there is very important, is that you don't have to be religious in order to appreciate the history of religion, because the history of religion is completely inextricable. You cannot remove it from history and still understand why Europe has developed the way it has, why the larger world has had this relationship with Christianity, with evangelization and missionary work and colonization, and all of those pieces that become so fundamental to our understanding of where the world is today. So being part of a faith is not necessarily the same thing as dealing with the history of it. I think dealing with the history of religion from a secular perspective is very important. And it also makes it a lot more fun and interesting, because the history of religion from a religious point of view is doctrine and dogma and canon law. And
you need to believe in that, in order to, so you cannot question in too much.
Exactly. And so,
but as a lay person, you can question anything, and you can look at it from a secular point of view.
And you can also deal with the things about the church that are not great. When you are looking at the history of religion from a faith-based perspective, it can be hard to reconcile with your moral code and what you believe in. But if you can look at it outside of that perspective and look at the fact that the Pope makes mistakes and is a human man who is led by human ambitions in many cases, that has had an impact on the rest of the world. There's no way to deny that force. And so to be able to give it its due without all of the weight that the actual religion puts on it is still to have this incredibly rich and interesting history. And it's a lot more fun too, because you don't have to hide all of the scandals. You don't have to
you can just talk about them. At the same time, I must say, I really like the fact that in your podcast, you don't search for the scandal. And you're trying always to also show the good, which is, because I think that could be another tendency if you look at it from a secular perspective, is to be too secular. So to pretend that men that lived 1,500 years ago think, walk, and like us today, and I think that's also a danger. And absolutely. I like how you strike the balance. So I want to tell you that publicly.
And I think that's also important too, right? Because no individual that has ever existed in history that we look at, for good or ill, everyone is a human being, really. So there's no person that is purely 100% evil. There are people who have done things that have been incredibly evil, and it would be easy to focus on that. But you can't understand that without understanding who that person is, both good and bad. So looking at a pope who may have a history of murder and terrible things associated with them, we gotta know why, right? We gotta know why.
We want to know why. What was motivating him?
Exactly.
So another introductory question is this one. So in Italy, we are often taught that, there's 476, the end of the world, as you know. and at the end and after the fall of the Roman Empire, and we forget that there is another Roman Empire that is well alive, there's only one thing standing, and is the church. Usually the Catholic Church, we assume that is, and basically we assume that we kind of project the power of the current modern, I will say even medieval papacy, into the 6th, 5th, 6th, 7th century papacy. How that image reflects reality?
Well, I think that it's one of those situations where we dealing with this idea of the fall of Rome, and that everything just ends at the fall of Rome, 476.
Here has fallen.
Yeah, just the fall of Rome. It's gone, everything's done. And then out of the rubble comes the church. But it's not exactly as accurate as all of that, because we do still have the Eastern Roman Empire and the Byzantines. And they are still, for a lot of this period, they are engaging with Italy in an entirely different way. And just because it's different doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There is quite a lot of influence at that time. And throughout this period, and for centuries still, the authority of the bishops of Rome is tied to their proximity and their rapport with secular leaders. It used to be the emperor in Rome. It is now the emperor in Constantinople, with all the dynamics that then shift as a result. However, when that secular ruler then becomes destabilized or challenged or busy or angry, it becomes an opportunity for the bishops to then have the biggest gain in power. It comes at the expense of the decline of the secular rulers. So it's much more than just this is the end point now, it's the church. It's a far more fluctuative, up and down.
It ebbs and flows. That's another thing. You notice how the authority of the church grows, for example, through the Ostrogothic, which is another topic. We're not going to cover it today. But then it declines quite abruptly, and it takes a long time to recover. Is that did I give it justice to a bit about this ebb and flow?
Absolutely. And not only that, there is this argument made for it that you can tie the rise of the papacy directly to the failings of the empire. And that is true, but it's not this incredibly straight line. We have to deal with the fact that we have a power vacuum that comes and goes throughout Rome. And it becomes more of a practical thing than an idea of power. we see the popes begin to fill in for the basic needs of the people, right? When imperial bureaucracy starts to crumble and break down, when we have things like rebellious exarchs who are no longer going to make a great connection between the emperor and the pope, or lack of forces, or disruption between Ravenna and Rome based on Lombard incursion or something, the popes continue to act in this very vital way, right? They're protecting people from famine, they're giving public service to the poor, taking care of flooding, those kind of things, taking care of defenses of the city. And so it becomes this sort of building block, brick by brick. The church doesn't just spring up and take over. It has to sort of...
But at the beginning of this period, basically, the Archbishop of Rome is not even in control of Rome, per se. This is another issue that we have, that the Archbishop of Rome, Roman Empire falls. So, of course, the Archbishop of Rome is in control of Rome. And that's not even that accurate. I mean, it becomes, right, through the Byzantine papacy at a certain point, and there's not even a point where you can say, okay, here definitely now he's in control, here isn't, right?
Yes, exactly. And there is, in fact, a secular Byzantine authority in Rome at these times that we're talking about. It becomes this conversation of what the idea of power is versus the practical application. The only reason that the popes at this time start to gain an authority is that they're doing more for the people on a pastoral level. Not that they are out there and fighting about which theology is right and what kings should be doing, because that's not really a discussion that we're having yet. There isn't really a papal moral judgment on the behaviors of the emperors so much during this time. But then you have this duke sitting in Rome who's not really doing that much. He's there to maintain control, but the pope is then feeding people. Which one are you going to trust more?
Over time, of course, the person that gives you food and is the pastor of the souls, etc., becomes the head of the city. Also, because the Senate at a certain point disappears because the war, the Greco-Gothic War. So you have basically the Senate that is decimated. So that was also another big source of secular authority in Rome. And then it's supplanted by basically military leaders. Like the first is Narcissus. And I'm pretty sure when Narcissus was there, he was calling the shots.
And it certainly seems that way, but he was very unpopular as a result of that. So
yeah, exactly. Right. So he gets recalled because the Narcissus, for people that don't know, is the guy that is the eunuch general that conquers Italy for Justinian, finally finishes the job. He sets shops in Rome on the Palatine, if I'm not mistaken, and then he gets very unpopular because the Byzantine authority also is unpopular, clearly, and so he gets recalled, and then over time the authority, the secular authority becomes the authority in Ravenna. So you have this bipolar division of Byzantine Italy between Rome and Ravenna, the two main points. There are not the only ones, but they are definitely the most important ones. So I guess we kind of touched on this point. And the next question was, how was organized Rome during the Byzantine papacy? I don't know. Is there anything else that we can talk about? Maybe also talk about the relationship between Rome, the ducal area, and the exarchs and the Lombards. I guess this is important, to understand how Italy is shaped during these 2 centuries.
Absolutely, and this is important too. We need to start, I think, with the Ostrogoths as well. We can't count them out yet because at the beginning of the Byzantine papacy, they are also present. So the way that Italy is functioning as a whole is constantly in flux because we have the exarch, who is the arm of the emperor. He is the official administrator of Italy as a whole. That is his job. He is supposed to represent Italy for the whole of the empire. However, the actual amount of territory that they end up being in control of is essentially Ravenna itself, Rome, and the tiny little bit in between, because then we have these additional forces that come from outside of Italy and decide to settle in Italy. First, the Ostrogoths, who have presented a problem for the empire for the first 100 years or so, and then eventually are somewhat diminished as a result of Narses. He kind of puts them aside. But then we have the Lombards come in, again, because of Narses. Narses sort of invites them into Italy out of spite. Not that they weren't already sort of there, but he sort of makes it like, hey, this is some land and it's free for the taking because I'm not going to stop you. And out of that, we get the foundation of this new kingdom that is completely separate of the empire. So there's no relationship between the empire and the Lombards the same way there is with Rome, which still wants to consider itself.
Rome is closer in that sense politically to Constantinople than it is to Milan.
Absolutely. For sure, because we then have this incredible, and not only just on a political level, but on a religious level too, because
we have for the first split, the three chapters, right?
That too, but even before that, when the Lombards start coming into Italy and they start actually taking territory, they are Arian Christians. So they are already not in agreement with either the empire or with Rome, who is in and out of the empire as we go. So they have not only this threat of these people are not like us, these people do not share our religion. This is before we even get into Monophysitism, which is the next big one. They're still stuck back in the old heresy.
Basically, they are stuck at Nicaea, let's say, the Nicaea. So Nicaea, the first council, the first, of course, ecumenical council, and so we have the Lombards. They are Arians. They are also pagans. So it's kind of a mixture, which is even worse from the point of view of the church, obviously. And then I was talking about these three chapters because it's interesting because it's kind of intertwined with Justinian story and how that has ripples effects on also the status of the church, right? During the Vigilius papacy.
Well, and I think that also, the three chapters represent something that I'll touch on briefly, and then we'll get into what the actual heresies are and how it affects. But the three chapters is a perfect example of something that characterizes the entire Byzantine papacy, which is a time where the emperors start fancying themselves as theologians. And they, probably based on the fact that we have a rise of influence of the Patriarch of Constantinople, who is becoming more influential because of the proximity to the emperor. But then we have the emperor, by proximity of the patriarch, going, I can write what theology should be. So they suddenly take on this very strong, I shouldn't say suddenly, but they take on a very strong initiative that they, as emperors, should be the one to write edicts about religion and tell people what they should be believing. And then the Pope and the Patriarch should then come in line with the judgment of the emperor rather than the other way around. So this is most prevalent in the three chapters, which in itself should not be a controversy. It's somewhat an effort to reconcile an old controversy, which is Monophysitism. So it might be good if we go through kind of Monophysitism into the three chapters, because Monophysitism, again, arose in the 5th century and is a Christological argument about the divine and human nature of Christ. So Monophysites believe that Christ only has one nature and that it is divine, whereas the Western Christians, Nestorians, let's do Nestorians.
I understood it like this. So on one end you have the Monophysites, and on the other end you have the Nestorians, and kind of the Orthodox Church is kind of in the middle, but I would say a bit more on the Nestorian side than on the. I think if a theologian heard me, he will showed me. But my impression is a little bit more on the Nestorian side. But
so Monophysites, one nature, only divine. Nestorians, two separate natures that have nothing to do with one another. The Western Orthodox Christianity lands somewhere in the middle where they exist together, but they're not combined. So based on that argument, the 3 chapters comes out of that because Justinian wants to reconcile Monophysites and the Western Orthodox view. And so what he does is he pulls up 3 dead theologians, no longer alive, so it's no longer, in his view, it's not going to be controversial, that write viewpoints that are Nestorian or close enough to Nestorian. They seem to indicate 2 separate wills, whether overtly or more subtly. And so he decides, let's condemn these men and bring an end to this, because that's something the Monophysites and the Western Orthodox will agree on. And that turns out to absolutely not be the case. They do not agree on this at all, particularly because to the Western Orthodox Christians and the Pope, there is no overt condemnation of Monophysitism, which the one nature is still wrong to them. So even if they agree with the Monophysites about these particular writers, there is no balance to this. And this becomes a huge, huge controversy because the first Pope who has to deal with Justinian in this is Pope Vigilius. And Vigilius is a mess. He handles this in the worst possible way, because he agrees to condemn these edicts. He's like, great, this is fine. I will condemn them and we will be fine. And that goes incredibly, incredibly poorly for him in Rome, where everyone's going, hey, wait a second, this makes no sense. So he then retracts the condemnation with permission from Justinian, as long as he secretly agreed to condemn them later.
Which, of course, he doesn't.
Which he does not. And this leads to him being dragged out of a church by his beard.
And he demolishes one altar. I remember this scene is fantastic. I can imagine the Pope hugging the altar.
He's literally, they're grabbing onto him everywhere that they can reach. And they are dragging the Pope, kicking and screaming, out of this building, which has now a broken column. So it may be falling apart. We don't know. He's then hauled off to Constantinople, and he has to capitulate to Justinian. And
I think this is the beginning, really, of the Byzantine papacy.
Absolutely.
So we have defined that now the papacy, a pope can be dragged around. And right after that, we have the confirmation. So let's talk about the Byzantine. Sorry, I went into too many details. Too fast, probably. But let's talk this now in general about the Byzantine papacy and what it is, why we call it like that. We have introduced, I think, a few concepts so that the people that are listening to us can understand. So we're talking about between the 6th and the 8th century, but can you give us the characteristics of the Byzantine papacy?
So like you said, 6th to 8th century, we go from Pope Vigilius all the way to Pope Zachary, beginning with the influence, of course, of Emperor Justinian. And this marks a period where we have a bunch of different characteristics. And the first being the emperor has a huge influence over the Pope, to the point where he, in many cases, decides who will be Pope next. The Pope is, in many cases during the Byzantine papacy, appointed by the emperor.
Ambassador often is the ambassador of the papacy to Constantinople. That happens many, many times.
Which makes absolute sense from the perspective of the emperor, because this representative of the Pope to the emperor, called the apocricary, is the one that he would have the most Eastern influence over. Exactly. He can influence him. He can, and generally speaking as well, this is another point on that. If you are the papal apocricarius, you likely are somebody who is familiar with Greek and exposed to Greek culture. So you're already more likely to lean the emperor's way, perhaps. So this is somebody that he wants to be in power. The other aspect of that, if the emperor is not choosing the pope directly, they still require that the pope be confirmed by them. Yeah. So an election can happen for a pope, and that election can be free, but that pope is not officially consecrated as pope until the emperor says, "I approve of this choice." And that changes a huge dynamic.
And I think it's so little known, this fact. I mean, of course, people that learn about this part of history, they do know, but it's not so well known because, again, we projected the papacy role in future centuries to these centuries, where the pope is an archbishop of a very important archbishop. Anyway, and sorry, too difficult word in English. Archbishop. No, it doesn't come out. So
archbishopric.
Archbishop. Okay. And so it's a patriarch, of course, like there is a patriarch and there is even a bit of competition between the patriarch of Constantinople, of course, and the patriarch of Rome. Constantinople, of course, is the big city, is the imperial capital. Rome, seen from Constantinople, is like a little town, right?
And that's another one of the main characteristics of this period, is that we have the rise of the patriarch in Constantinople. Because Rome looks like the old world, there is a reason that Constantinople in this period is called New Rome so often and so regularly. They are making a point about what their role should be. And this is the highest religious official who is in contact with the emperor the most often and has the most influence. And this is why we see that the next characteristic of the Byzantine papacy is a huge increase in theological conflicts, because the emperor is always, well, not always, but generally going to take the advice and the influence of the patriarch. And the patriarch is always going to have a more Eastern-leaning philosophy about especially Christology.
And Christology is also, besides the theology, of course, it's important, but it's also a practical reason, because the Eastern emperors, they need to mend that division that they have their territory between monophysites and Orthodox and Chalcedonians. They need to do it in order to have a united Eastern Church, which is not a priority for the papacy, because there are no monophysites in the West. So, and it kind of, I think the papacy really hitched the bandwagon of Chalcedon, because it was such a big win for the papacy with Leo the Great. So in a way, it's so important, we won big, now we cannot change one little detail of that Chalcedonian win. Right, because that's the source of our authority, in a way.
And that's exactly it. Because one of the things that happens here is the Pope is too far away to be able to personally influence the emperor. So if the emperor starts to get ideas about religion, and the emperor believes that he has the authority to make those decisions about religion, we're seeing a juxtaposition, and this is not reconciled by having a papal apocrisiary, because the apocrisiary is often ignored. You have to be amazing as an apocrisiary to even slightly bend the emperor's ear at this point. And even Gregory the Great, who was such a substantial figure in the church and is one of the only popes to have that epithet of the Great, even then, when he was an apocrisiary, he was ignored for months and months and months about something fairly critical to the papacy. So we have this divide where we have the Pope, who already sees every threat to his authority, and he has to find the best way to hang on to it. And the best way to hang on to it is to cling to Pope Leo.
Leo and Chalcedon, because that's the best way to hang on authority, which is under threat everywhere. In a way, it's very interesting. And even seems miraculous that the authority of the Pope came out of this period on such a high standing, because you have you have several times, for example, also you mentioned that the Patriarch of Constantinople wants to be called ecumenical patriarch.
Yes.
Just to say, we're all patriarch, but I'm a bit more patriarch than everyone.
Than everyone. That's what ecumenical means.
Ecumenical is everyone. And today, the Patriarch of Constantinople, after, the Great Schism in the 11th century, is called the Ecumenical Patriarch. So they never forgot about this. So you have the authority of the Pope challenged from the Emperor, challenged from the Ecumenical Patriarch, and you have it also challenged by constantly. You have Aquileia in schism for a very long time. Ravenna every now and then tries to say, well, I really would like to be my own thing. Thank you.
Which is the same thing when you think about it. Ravenna only wants to be wants to be autocephalous, wants to be separate from Rome, is because they've watched Constantinople do it. They're like, hey, you have the emperor and you're getting away with this. We have the exarch. We should be getting away with this too. It's the exact same argument, just on a smaller scale.
Exactly. So in a much smaller, and that's why it fails eventually, also because Ravenna and the exarch power declines. But in general, I could see a parallel timeline where things go differently. And then the other challenge is very secular, because you have the Lombards, both dukes and kings, which are literally at the gates
all
of Rome.
All the time. They're always there. I know. These are perhaps my most frustrating sources to deal with is the fact that the Lombards are consistently and regularly just at the gates of Rome, and they have their own ideas about what they're going to do. And sometimes that is a result of what's happening in the East, because very early on, we see the exarchs because going back to the idea of having all of these theological conflicts, and that all of these theological conflicts come back to trying to reconcile the first one, which is Monophysitism, and the Pope trying to hold on to the authority.
Yeah.
So
all the other things, the 3 chapters and monoenergism and monothelitism, it's all because of Chalcedon.
It's all because of that challenge to the authority on that issue, and the fact that the emperor has to unite his church.
That's
so
more active.
In every iteration that we have of those different heresies, we also have situations where the exarch decides he's going to march on Rome and make an example of the Pope. And what does he do? He calls the Lombards for more support. So there are more forces at the gates of Rome.
And it's so complicated and fascinating, the politics this time, because you have so many powers, and each one checks each other in a way. So the Pope can ally with the Lombard against the exarch with the Lombard against the Pope.
And then the Franks, when the exarch and the Lombards are together, you call the Franks to come in.
Exactly. So you have always these powers juggling, and it feels a lot more like I'm Italian with Italian politics today. So anyway, so unlike the imperial, so another aspect that is really interesting about this period is how Greek culture of Rome is. And, we always assume in the West that, of course, Rome is how can you not do Latin in Rome, right? And yet, things are a bit different, right, Bri?
Very, very. We have almost predominantly Greek-speaking popes or popes who were originally born in the more Eastern-style countries, cities, areas.
Yeah, Syria, but maybe they're Greek speakers from Syria, or
Absolutely.
even Calabria, I remember, from South Italy, but, like...
Sicily.
Yeah. And this is I remember you made this example of English bishop. I don't remember the exact case, that visited Rome, and he could not understand. There was a trial about him, and he could not understand the trial because he spoke Latin, the English, and everybody in the Curia in Rome spoke Greek.
Yes, I felt so bad for him. And it is a perfect symptom of this Byzantine papacy and the influence of the emperor, right? If you think about, well, there's a number of reasons, but the first one is that, again, most of these popes are appointed by the emperor. So they were papal apocrisaries. So they were the people who spoke Greek and were more effective at that job. So if you were a Greek cleric, you were more likely to want to show your skills, and then you might have a chance to go to Constantinople. Yeah, exactly. It's a huge promotion to be, and then it could lead all the way to Pope. And then, of course, because there's so many communications going back and forth during the controversy, we have people resettling. But a big part of this, too, is when we start to see Muslim expansion. This is the rise of Islam in this time period. And so we have the Muslim conquering of the Levant. We have the Muslim expansion into Sicily. And this leads to several significant different exodus out of these areas by Christians. And it seems that there was this really strong desire that if you were being pushed out of where you lived based on your Christianity, that Rome was the place to end up in. Yeah, and we see like several popes throughout the 7th and 8th century that end up in Rome specifically because of these conquests. So we are seeing a huge... And then there's also the other aspect of any military force that did come into Italy at this point that wasn't a Lombard, wasn't an Ostrogoth, wasn't a Frank, was coming from the east. And yes, those moments were extremely rare because, again, the empire is stretched on all sides.
Really, this was really like the least important. It's in a way, it's amazing that they held on it, but it was. They were fighting for their own lives in Constantinople at this time, and you know it's incredible that Italy remained Byzantine for as long as it did.
Really, really, really incredible, and that probably would have all fallen apart if it weren't for the period that comes next, which is the Franks. Because I think if you didn't have the Franks come in at that point, we would be dealing specifically with a Lombard Italy.
Yeah, so. And we will become, and this is something, you know, this is a bone that a lot of Italians have to pick with the church, where they like history. Is like, you always make it impossible for a united Italy to appear. And that is, I think, fair comment. Yeah. Yes, it was not in the interest of the papacy to have
no.
They had that experience under the Ostrogoths, and you know, they were bossed around, so they didn't want to repeat the experience, right? So,
and that's exactly it. If the rest of Italy had come together, we wouldn't be looking at the history of the popes as an institution of power.
I think it probably with a united Italy, and you know, I imagine, let's do this fantasy history. You would have had the Lombard king, which with a strong sway on the Bishop of Rome.
Yes.
At that point, I don't think that, for example, in Gaul, in Francia, you know, they would have continued to listen to the Pope. They would have elected a patriarch for the kingdom of the Franks.
Absolutely.
You know, they would have not been the papacy per se, but they would be a powerful bishop in each of the main kingdoms. Yeah. That's my guess. You never know.
I agree. I think that that's incredibly accurate, because I think like you said, the idea of a pope would sort of dissipate. There would be no motivation for anybody to listen to the Pope, especially when we look at someone. I'm skipping ahead here, but if we were looking at someone like Pepin the Short and his need for the Pope to verify and validate his ambitions, why would he be interested in the bishop of the Lombards? Like, there would be none of that legacy or that idea of moral authority that becomes very important after the Byzantine papacy.
Because let's explain. I think many people know, but let's explain. Of course, the kingdom of the Franks was ruled by the Merovingians at that was founded at the beginning of their kingdom. But over time, in the 8th century, you have the master of the palace, which are the more powerful than the kings, but they cannot be kings like like in Lord of the Rings. Denethor cannot become a king. I think it comes straight from that. But, and so the only way for Denethor to become a king is for a pope that doesn't exist in Middle Earth, so that's why he never became king, to be made king. That's the only way. Otherwise, you'll always have to wait for an Aragorn. So that's a kind of in a nutshell. And this is really the end of the Byzantine papacy, because at that point in the 8th century, the power of Byzantium has waned for several reasons. They basically under siege in 717 from the Arabs. The power really has declined. Pope looks any day now, Rome will be conquered by the Lombards, so the Pope calls in. But it's an agreement, with the Franks, basically.
Well, and that's a symptom of the another characteristic of the Byzantine papacy is that despite the fact that the emperor has an incredible amount of influence over who is going to become pope and puts all this pressure on the pope to meet their religious standards, in every other way, Italy is not a priority of this empire any longer. It is an area that is constantly under siege. It is a waste of resources. They have no real need for it, other than the fact that the Pope has held on to this level of authority. Italy becomes, I would like to argue that Italy in the empire becomes somewhat of an ego project. You have it because it has that legacy, but it doesn't actually serve
Rome and Ravenna. It's exactly. Rome. It's the Roman Empire. We are holding on to Rome.
Yes.
And Ravenna, the last capital of the Western Roman Empire. And it's such a prestige.
Exactly. And so they don't prioritize anything but that level of prestige. So on the ground, if we have Rome and Italy in famine, if we have Rome and Italy in natural disasters, or even if we have an outside secular threat like the Lombards or the Franks or the Ostrogoths or the Muslims, it's just not worth putting the energy and the effort into. And that's why we see this period come to an end. Like you said, the Pope is looking, and any day they're going to be conquered by the Lombards. And the person that they constantly go to help for, the person they've tried to be loyal to, the Eastern Emperor, is ignoring all of their needs or saying, we have not enough resources to send you anything, figure it out. This is a big problem.
Yeah. So let's see. I have another question. So there's a lot of popes in this period. Which one is your favorite? Doesn't have to be the best. And which one you think is the most disastrous for, or the worst, for the church history?
Well, my favorite pope of the entire Byzantine papacy is Pope Honorius. And this is an ironic answer because you could also argue that he has done the most damage. That is not my answer for most damage, but you could make that argument. And that is because for the time that Honorius was pope, he did an excellent job. He was the pope of the people of Rome, and he did all of those things that made the people of Rome trust in the authority of the pope, because he was rebuilding Rome. He was providing water to Rome and basic necessities that hadn't been seen in Rome for a very long time. So he was making Rome viable as a city that could still function and thrive and not just limp on in starvation and what. So he is the kind of pope that is the reason that people in Rome followed the pope as their main authority. However, because he is the first pope to comment on monothelitism, which is basically Monophysitism 2.0, just changing the word nature to will, he is the first person that this argument is presented to. And at the time where he receives a very compelling letter trying to make this argument, he goes, well, that seems to make sense. And because he said, well, that seems to make sense, after his death, he was anathematized as a heretic for encouraging or defiling the seat of Peter with heresy because he allegedly, potentially encouraged monothelitism. And that has a 1,000-year legacy where when we deal with issues of papal infallibility and how the Pope can never be wrong, they look back to Honorius.
We're talking about the Vatican Council #1, right? So we're talking about in the 19th century, they were using this example to argue against infallibility, because it said there has been one heretical Pope recognized by the Orthodox Church. Yeah. So the Pope cannot be infallible because one has done an error
and has been excommunicated for it, and that becomes something that becomes very hard for them to overlook, and one can make the argument that the conclusion that they come to requires a lot of mental gymnastics to get there, because they have to work all the way around him.
Not really agree. He was more like, interesting.
Yeah, well, he didn't say this as an official edict, so he wasn't speaking ex cathedra, so it doesn't count.
It doesn't count because it wasn't ex cathedra, something like that.
Exactly.
And what about the worst?
So if I had to make an argument for the Pope who made the most damage, it would have to be Pope Vigilius, because this is a man, and that he's like, there is a reason that the Byzantine papacy period of the emperors having so much influence over the popes is designated as his papacy, because up until that point, we were still riding on the high from Pope Leo, and there was a prestige and an honor and an authority about the popes. And then you get this man who can't make up his own mind about where the theological line is, which is very damaging in itself. The Pope doesn't actually know the right theology. And then you have a Pope who, again, we have this incredible legacy of popes up until this point where the first 20 or more were martyred. So we have this history of, even when it's tough, generally the popes stood by their position. Yes, they resisted, and he is not resisting, and he is going back and forth and back and forth. And then it comes out that even as he's been dragged away and looks like he's resisting the emperor comes out and has receipts and documents that Vigilius is secretly planning all along, that when things calm down, he's going to agree with the emperor, and just has a complete character assassination. And this just completely destroys the prestige of the papacy.
Saying, like Justinian says, not against the chair, but against whom he sits on it. But anyway, the damage. And it's ironic in a certain way that Justinian and Justin, they came to power because they were the champions of Chalcedon and of the authority of the popes. The first thing they do, they are so happy about the Pope visiting them, and it's so ironic that starting from there, then it's Justinian himself that really crushes the authority of the papacy.
And we haven't even talked yet. Like, this is the big thing about Vigilius, is he's completely destroyed the prestige of the papacy. But we have also not even began to talk about the fact that he was a horrible person who, through his own ambitions, led to the deposition and death of his predecessor.
I said that in the podcast. It's an incredible story, intertwined with Belisarius and with Antonina and with Theodora, of course. But it's such an interesting story, how politics, religion, because you can see that Justinian, behind the mask of the champion of Chalcedon, I think during his entire reign, he was trying to mend the rift with the Monophysites. That was a very high priority for him, bigger than many others. And all the dealing and scheming and dealing of his reign is really with that goal in mind. And he's not gonna stop at anything. And he finds this guy that he's happy to go along as long as he gets the job. Sure, I'll do whatever. Just do the job. It's such a movie scene. I can totally see it.
I can't believe it's not a movie. Like, how is a movie about Justinian and that not made already?
The current pope cannot do my bidding. Are you gonna do the bidding if I get rid of the other one? Or something like that.
I think it's because it would be controversial because Justinian has such a powerful legacy and he is so many people's favorite emperor that they just kind of want to ignore the tyrannical side.
Yeah. But the good thing is that people that already listen to a live a month ago we did with an expert of Byzantine history, and he also didn't like Justinian. He said, I'm an expert of Byzantine history, I love Byzantine history, but I don't like Justinian. So it's okay. Well, I think we have already broken that
good
dogma.
I'm not the only one then, because I feel like that's a very controversial thing to say, but I am just not. I don't like him either.
So Stuart is so here's someone that says hi to you. Good to see you, Bry. At 2 times, that's really fast.
Wow, I talk really fast. I can't imagine what I sound like.
I cannot imagine. For me, it would be 4 times.
Oh my gosh.
And this allows me to say, if you have questions, please write the questions. We will try to answer. E se lo volete scrivere in italiano, se siete in italiano, potete scrivere in italiano, lo traduco io. Ok? Quindi non c'è problema.
Yeah, you see how you just sped up again, like completely when you switched to Italian?
Yeah. It's okay. It's the nature.
I'm impressed that, listening to us at 2 speed, that's very impressive.
Fast. So of all the controversies, so you have Arians against Nicaeans, Monophysites against the Chalcedonians. Then it feels a bit like Star Trek, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have the monothelitism, monoenergism, and iconoclastism. Which one is iconoclast? Okay, yeah. Sorry. Controversia sull'iconoclastia. Sorry. So which one is your favorite one?
Ooh, I think that the 3 chapters is very interesting because we get the story of Pope Vigilius out of it, and because he is so terrible as a human and as a pope. That is one of the favorite things that I've covered so far. But if I had to think of like favorite controversy, I would have to say iconoclasm, because to me it has the most validity. And this is I am, again, not a religious person myself. So the idea of the manifestations of Christology is not compelling to me. I understand why it is compelling to a pope, again, for authority, and why it is compelling to people who genuinely struggled with this question. But to me, it's not compelling. It just becomes that dogma, doctrine, whatever sort of thing. But iconoclasm, they have a point. If we look at the early history of the church, if we look at the first popes, almost all of them, the biggest thing that they had going for them in the early church, from Peter to Linus onwards, was destroying idolatry. And this becomes this is a fundamental 10 commandments type moment for the church. And yet, like, there is no way to deny that the Catholic Church has one of the grandest and most elaborate legacy of religious images and icon making. And I am very convinced by the argument that they make about how that could very easily slip into idolatry.
And it's in a way, I can tell you, for example, in a small village in my region, in Abruzzo, you have a festival where they bring the statue of San Domenico in a procession with snakes all around it. Live snakes, big snakes. It's fantastic. By the way, Cocullo in May, please go see it. It's just amazing. Anyways, and you take that statue of a saint and it's you put the statue of a pagan god, and and by the way, the people that lived there, they actually worshipped snakes in snake goddess. So it's obvious, the connection. But in a way, this is Christianity. When, we talk a lot about how Christianity changed the Roman Empire, but we should talk a lot about how the Roman Empire changed Christianity.
Absolutely.
It was inevitable.
Absolutely.
It was inevitable. And the Christianity comes from, originally is a revelation religion typical of the tradition of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. But when it gets in contact with Greek Roman culture, of course it gets something from it. And it cannot be complete idolatry, but the icons are close to it in concept.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, one of my favorite things about the Catholic Church is the iconography and the images. I love gilded saints. I love relics. These are Catholic aesthetic is one of my favorite things on the planet. I think it is so cool.
Churches, masterpieces that are in churches that and I live in Belgium now, and so much art was destroyed during the Reformation time. Yeah. It's and this is, we're talking here one of the homeland of the Renaissance. So there was a lot.
Yeah.
And 99% was destroyed. I mean, there's still a lot that's left. There's a lot, and you can come to Belgium. There's a lot of masterpieces, but there was so much more, and it was completely destroyed during the Reformation, which in a way is kind of the iconoclasm of the 2.0. And it's funny because when I say that to people that have maybe a Protestant, Reformation background, they tend to say, no, but iconoclasm was more like a reaction, and Protestant was more going forward. I don't see that. I think both of them try to go forward in a way.
Yeah. And I think, like you said before, that it's somewhat inextricable based on how it melded with the Roman and Greek culture, right? And as we see in many areas where they have melded like that, there is no way to separate that level of Christianity from those traditions without it being reactionary and progressive thinking, but also reactionary. There's no way. Yeah, you can't separate Protestantism from iconoclasm because they do, maybe not as a main point, because obviously Protestantism has.
But it's a big piece of it. It's a big piece of it. So we have a question. So Elisa Markov, let's show because it's related. There was a destruction, but also thanks to iconoclasm, Christians are finally had an established set of principles that are kept to this day in Eastern iconography. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's the reaction, right, to iconoclasm.
Absolutely. And it's not, again, like I absolutely understand their argument that they're making about icons, because it is a dangerous and slippery slope. And like you said, processions of idols, well, idols is probably the wrong word, but icons of saints. And then we have relics of saints that people believed were causing miracles in their life. Like these are things that you are very hard to extricate from Catholicism, but they are legitimate criticisms.
But they are even more ingrained, I think, in the East, because when the Eastern Church will emerge from iconoclasm, will be much more iconophile than the Western Church. Paradoxically, they started. So in the Greek Orthodox now, it's even stronger that relationship with the icons.
In a much more standardized way, I think, is
standardized. The point that Elisa was making, it's correct. There is actually really rules of how to make icons. You can't make icons the way you want. Unlike a painting in a Catholic church, you can theoretically make it the way you want it. Mm-hmm. That's not the case and I will say though that there is also so much art also of the so-called Byzantine, let's say late Roman art was destroyed because of iconoclasm. For example, we know the faces of Justinian and Theodora just because of we have those two mosaics, magnificent mosaics in Ravenna, because they were not in territory under iconoclasm. So if they would have, the one that were in Constantinople, they were all destroyed. So that's there's also that effect. Paradoxically, the best mosaics they are in Italy because there was no iconoclasm.
But they definitely had that influence too, and it is an interesting thing. I find it particularly interesting to look at how it was such a significant conflict to have iconoclasm. And if you look at Constantinople, iconoclasm was going to affect your day. No matter who you were as a person, this was such a massive issue that it was everywhere. Whereas in Italy, even though they were very aware of it and it came into their spectrum through the ongoing relationship with the emperor, it was never enforced in Italy the way that it was in Constantinople. So it's an interesting point of view to have such a valid criticism of Catholicism presented in a way that they have to deal with, but that they don't have to deal with in their face, tangible and practical way.
And then there's the secular impact, because really you can say that Italy's two big consequences. Italy really revolted against Constantinople, and this is the birth of Venice.
Mm-hmm.
The birth of the Venetian Republic is the icon rooted in the iconoclasm. So it's such an important moment, the birth of the Venetian Republic, the longest surviving republic in Europe, and really the independence of the papacy also comes from the iconoclasm.
Big time. And we see them doubling down in such a big way, right? We always joke on our show, it's become a common catchphrase to say, how you feel about them lambs? Because
the lamb, you put the lamb, and the lamb. And I loved in the last episode you said about the lamb being in the mass today.
Mm-hmm.
L'agnello di Dio che Agnus Dei. I know it. I knew it in Italian. I haven't been in a mass in a long time. So, che toglie I peccati dal mondo. Okay, yes, the Lamb of God that takes away. And they put the lamb there because the Byzantines were against the lamb representation of Jesus, right?
It was a very provocative thing for them to do, and it was interesting because that's Pope Sergius the First, and he becomes sort of not necessarily the only, but one of the turning tides of the Byzantine papacy. You can mark where the decline of the Byzantine papacy starts, sort of with Pope Sergius, and he is making it very clear in some of his statements that this is no longer something that they are going to be abiding to. So he is one that very much could have gone the same way as Pope Martin, and they wanted to drag him to Constantinople and have him just completely be judged for resisting, in that case, the Quinisext Council. But he just doubled down and he's like, no, look, we're not about iconoclasm. We're not about your authority. And now we're going to make a stand, and that is going to embolden and bolster that return or growth of the papal authority as we move forward.
Yeah, and so fascinating how this event is so little known, puts in motion so many things, including then eventually the whole thing what we alluded to about Pepin and the move to the Frankish authority, right? You want to comment about that? Explain maybe to the people listening what happens next.
So basically what happens is Rome, because at this point, at the end of the Byzantine papacy, Rome is very much in the hands of the popes. We've already started to see a little bit of the establishment of the papal states, including we've had the donation of Sutri, where one of the popes, who is Pope Gregory II, has received lands that are not within the traditional duchy of Rome as established by the empire. So they have now branched.
Let me explain this. So when the Byzantine Empire reconquers Italy, divides Italy into duchies.
Yes.
So you have the Duchy of Rome, where the Pope was the bishop, and you have the Duchy of Naples. Naples authority basically comes out of that. The Duchy of Venezia, Venice comes out of that. The Duchy of, the Exarchate and the Pentapolis, they are all these duchies. And traditionally, the role of the Pope was limited to the Duchy of Rome.
Yes. And so now, in this moment with Pope Gregory II, from the Lombard king, he receives a bit of land that is outside of that traditional duchy of Rome. And in doing so, the papal states are de facto formed. Of course, they're not thinking about it as the papal states at this point, but that is generally where it is starting to go. And with that, there is a bigger need for, one, the Pope is now the authority in Rome because these are areas he's now holding in his own right. And there is a greater need for defense because now we are seeing, again, aggression of the Lombards because they're friends one day and they're not the other. And we are also seeing actual incursions of Muslims coming into the territory and very threateningly so, very close by. And so based on that, we see the Pope really pushing the emperor to support him and to give him defense. And that is just not happening. And that is a tradition at this point of not happening. It is a tradition for the emperor to ignore the Pope's requests.
In a way, it's incredible how faithful they were for 2 centuries to the Roman Empire. I think they really felt that they were the Bishop of Rome, so they needed to be faithful to the Roman Empire.
Yes, absolutely.
And it took a very long time to get to the point where you're about to go, when they betray the Roman Empire.
Well, and by the time that they're writing to Charles Martel, going a little bit further back than Pepin, by the time they're writing to Charles Martel, they are desperate. They are absolutely desperate. There are Lombards at the gate of Rome, and it is about to be a sack of Rome situation, and they are absolutely desperate, and they're hearing nothing from the emperor. So when Charles Martel kind of, sort of, a little bit answers them and gives some support, they're like, great, someone is going to help us. And that establishes a relationship that then someone like Pepin, who sees an opportunity to be the power both in name and in fact, that he can use the religion to say, if the Pope agrees with what I'm doing, then I must be backed by God. And this becomes that association of the Pope being the moral authority of the leaders. Because if the Pope agrees that you have a legitimate right to rule, you now have an incredible platform in which to be a king, a real king.
Now finally Denethor can become Aragorn.
Exactly. Yes.
So and here I think this is a very interesting question from Francesca. I mean, it's a comment, right, and a question, because this is the time when we have the change of protector from Byzantine to Franks. Mm-hmm. And says, so Byzantine, Franks, and France historically in some way protected or influenced the papacy for centuries. Who is keeping this torch baton now? If indeed we still have something like that.
Well, we could say in the modern period that starts with Mussolini and the creation of the Papal States, because it becomes not Vatican City. It becomes sort of a very segmented, very separate thing in which can be defended. But I think that the better answer to that question would be the Swiss Guard, because even though it is not a nation or it doesn't have the same rollout force that we would be looking at for something like an entire nation to support and defend the Pope, the Swiss Guard they actually have the longest standing legacy of defending and protecting the Pope. It's just... Yeah. It looks much smaller now. In a physical way, yeah. In a theological way, I don't know if we could make a parallel.
I don't think so, because really, you can tell. You can say France up until 1870 and the fall of Napoleon III was the protector of the church, and was protecting the church, France, up until that point. But after that, it's hard to say there is one secular power that is nation that is protecting the church. It's not the United States, because the United States is not, there are a lot of Catholics, but it's definitely not a Catholic country. It's funny for me to watch it become more closer to Catholicism than they have ever been. But yes, I remember when Francis visited and the speaker of the Senate, I think, was almost crying because the Pope was there, and this would have never happened 50 years earlier.
Yeah, true.
But I don't think they have that role, and I don't think any European country has that role today, or the European Union. They're very secular. So I think they're really on their own. What do you think, Brie?
I mean, we could argue that the Pope is the only person defending that on such a theological level, and he's doing. I mean, it's kind of a lazy answer, perhaps, but it's true that now, if we're looking for someone to really set the stage, the Pope doesn't really have to rely on people in the same way that he would have. Even at when we look at the Pope, when we look at the height of the papal power, is, let's say late medieval ages, early Renaissance, early modern period, as being incredibly powerful, they still relied on kings to be their backing force or to have their own armies. And I don't know, I think the Pope is so well established now that there isn't such a need for it.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, I agree. So I have one last question for you, Brie, and it is a weird question.
Okay.
So you have a building,
Mm-hmm.
you're a typical scene, no? And you have an exarch and a Lombard king. Which one do you throw from the tower?
Oh, the Lombard king. I will throw.
Lombard. I will. So you really don't like these Lombard kings?
Well, I'll explain that answer too, because I think that there are the exarchs are just as problematic for the popes during the Byzantine papacy as the Lombards are. However, the exarchs are less successful as a general rule. If you look at, yes, we have Pope Martin, who was dragged away. Yeah.
Shipped. Let's say this story because it's interesting. I don't think many will know it.
Yeah, and we do have. So we have Pope Martin, who resisted the emperor, and so he's dragged away literally to Constantinople, where he is set on trial. He is condemned to death. His sentence is commuted to exile, and he dies in captivity and exile, and it's terrible. And of course, we also have Belisarius deposing Silverius, and we have what happens to Vigilius. However, if you compare that to how many times exarchs were sent to assassinate the Pope and fail, and often fail, they either fail because of miracles, or they fail because the people of Rome will tear them limb from limb. Like, they fail a lot more than they are successful. Whereas when the Lombards showed up and they were going to cause destruction, they often caused the destruction, or they caused the pain. So they were a lot more successful in being an obstruction of the Pope. And for that reason, especially if it's Desiderius, which is more leaning into the Carolingian papacy than the Byzantine, but if I could throw him off a building, I would love it.
Immediately.
Yeah, okay. I would absolutely throw him off.
So I think, so I hope this chat has given you curiosity about this very obscure period of papal and, generally speaking, Italian European history. If there's no other, I don't see any other extra question. This is last call. Ultima possibilità per fare domande. We have a little comment. There is also not so much territory to defend anymore. True.
Yes, absolutely.
Up until 1870 there was. And then now, now they have a little territory, but I don't think it's... So I thought the fenestration was...
Well, we're bringing it back to the Byzantine period, so
that's by the way, the 30 Years' War is one of my pet periods, of history. I really love it. One day I want to cover it. It will take a few decades, but
I know that feeling.
At least you have one pope, one episode, so that helps to hum along.
Certainly helps.
But then. She did not mention Windows, but it could have totally happened. It could have.
But if I could throw him out of a building and he'd hit the glass first, and then it would break, and then he would fall, I'd feel even better about it.
It's why throwing just from the building when you can throw him through the window and then.
That's exactly it. We can make it a historical legacy.
But there is so much. Sorry, I mean, I didn't even touch here. I had like a list of popes here. I wrote myself. We did not even touch to. There's so many crazy story in this period. So if you're interested into it, I really suggest listening to Bry and Fry's podcast Pontifacts. It's really great. One pope per episode. If he ruled 1 month or 30 years, you'll get one episode dedicated to him. And it's really great to see at the end how they're judged. So you'll have fun to listen to it. Thank you so much, Bry, for coming here. It was really a pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to discuss with you. So now we've just taken the way that we yell at each other about history and we've put it online for everybody.
For everyone, and apologies to everyone. You suffered through my pronunciation of bishopric.
You got it.
I got it. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night. I was going to say it's better than you having to listen to my Italian pronunciation because it would be so slow.
Try.
Chiacchierata.
Okay, that wasn't so bad. All right. Good night, guys.
E questo, come dico sempre, è quanto. Se vi è piaciuto questo episodio come il precedente, vi consiglio assolutamente di ascoltare Pontifacts. È un podcast irriverente sull'argomento, ma è fatto in modo molto serio, pur essendo appunto condotto da 2 ragazze che si divertono a parlare di papi e di uomini vissuti a volte 2000 anni fa. Podcast è arrivato appunto all'XI secolo, quindi avete praticamente un intero millennio di storia del papato da coprire e un millennio che arriva. Io vi ringrazio e vi rimando alla prossima puntata di Storia d'Italia Extra, che arriverà il prossimo mese e sarà anche quella, giuro, l'ultima, una puntata in inglese con dei podcaster che anche io adoro, li ho messi anche perfino nel libro, anzi nei libri che ho pubblicato come fonti, ma non vi svelo chi sono. Alla prossima!